Namaskar. Dear viewers, today we'll be discussing the topic climate change and society. We'll be trying to talk about the issues that can be related with climate change and society. There are many issues that are related with both domains, climate change and society. Nevertheless, there are a lot of concerns. So in today's agenda, we'll be start talking about the concerns at the intersection of climate change and society. What are the concerns? Second important aspect, we'll be trying to talk about how health, well-being of human beings are affected by climate change. Not only that, individuals, we need to talk about the communities as well. When I say communities, certain group of communities, certain section of our society are more vulnerable, particularly the indigenous communities. They are very closely attached with the nature. They are more vulnerable. Let us see why. The second aspect today we'll be discussing is how climate change can impact the natural resources, how it will be impacting agriculture and food security. Through these impacts, how the society is affected. Next, we'll be talking about the impact of climate change on coastal areas, because when you see the coastal location, or in other words, the population in the coastal areas is increasing year after year because of livelihood reasons, and also a lot of other greener pastures in the coastal areas. However, these coastal areas are more vulnerable to climate change. And not only climate change, the extreme weather events, whether it's an impact of tropical cyclone, temperate cyclone, or even all other weather-related phenomena. These coastal areas are more vulnerable. That also we'll be discussing in today's session. Thereafter, we'll be trying to talk about the impacts, the economic and social impacts of climate change. This indeed is a very important concern, because definitely the society, if it is impacted by climate change, the basic aspect is the economy of the individuals will be affected. Even the culture, that also can be influenced by climate change. Thereafter, we'll be trying to talk about what kind of support the national government, the state government, or even the international bodies, what kind of support they can give, whether it's in terms of finance or technology. So what kind of support that has to be given to reduce the impact of climate change on the society. Lastly, we'll be trying to talk about the justice aspect. When I talk about justice, because historically, if you see certain group of countries, the developed countries, they have been responsible for causing climate change. They have a very important role to play in the present era in terms of the financial support, technological support, and every way those developed countries should support the developing countries and underdeveloped countries. That is indeed climate justice. We need to talk about the equity as well. Within the country, even across the country, even globally also, the equity is more important thing. So climate equity, if it is addressed properly, then we'll be in a position to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2050. So let us see one by one. The foremost important concern that is in front of us is that this climate change impact is skewed. When I say it is skewed, certain sections are more vulnerable. As I said earlier, indigenous communities, even the poor, the children, the women, and elderly people are more impacted by climate change. The reason may be the socioeconomic condition and their age also. There may be other physical circumstances as well. So this is a major concern. So we need to address this issue in a different way. When I say different way, we cannot have a same solution for all group of people. So we need to look at individually, or in other words, community-wise. Then only our approach, our actions, particularly the climate action, will be fruitful. The second important concern as far as climate change and society is concerned is that the occurrence of diseases. Human health is going to be impacted by climate change. Whether it is the occurrence of pathogenic diseases or waterborne diseases or vector-borne diseases, the occurrence is going to increase, and it is increasing indeed, and it will be increasing further in the coming decade. Why? Because the temperature is increasing, and if we are not taking any steps at right time, that the magnitude of impact can increase further. The third important aspect is that we need to adapt ourselves to the changing climatic condition. This adaptation also should be equitable in nature, means everyone should be brought into the mainstream. I'm talking about the community mainstreaming. Thereafter, even the adaptation should be equitable in nature. Lastly, if you see the kind of support that is required for addressing the issue of climate change, the financial support particularly, it is enormous. And if you're not taking right step at right time, so the volume, what you call that, loss and damage because of climate change is going to increase. And it also can threaten the developmental trajectory, the developmental pathway, climate resilient development, we're talking about it. So everywhere, every country is talking about the climate resilient development, sustainable development, they're talking about it. That developmental trajectory can be impacted by climate change. So these are the concerns in front of us when we discuss climate change and society. Primarily, if you see, when any one of us is asked what kind of impact the climate change can have on the society, the emotions, positive emotions. And these are to be discussed primarily. Factors, particularly the temperature, other meteorological parameters, and also the extreme weather events, how these factors, climate risk factors, can impact human health. There are many ways possible, many pathways are existing. The first and foremost important aspect is the vector-borne diseases. The increase in temperature, or in other words, the climate change itself, it can impact the vectors, the host organisms, and also non-human beings as well. So because of this impact, the changing climatic condition, whether it is a high temperature or humidity, that can have an effect on the occurrence or incidence of waterborne diseases or vector-borne diseases. Okay, so let us see one by one those diseases. See, first comes to our mind is vector-borne diseases. As I told earlier, the vectors, whether it's a mosquito or rodents, ticks, see, all are somewhere related with the environmental conditions. So these vectors will be influenced by the climatic condition. And definitely, if you see, this will be influencing the transmission cycle, the transmission pathway, the season of occurrence. So that will be also influenced by climate change. The second important aspect is that these vectors can migrate. When I say migration also, it will be induced or driven by climate change. So because of these reasons, the occurrence of vector-borne diseases, particularly the mosquito-borne diseases, tick-borne diseases, they are going to increase. And it has been proven beyond doubt, the incidence is increasing in the last 2 or 3 decades. Next one is the waterborne diseases. When you talk about waterborne diseases, similar to your vector-borne diseases, this waterborne diseases also, the main reason may be the contaminated drinking water. Definitely the drinking water, if it has been contaminated by pathogenic microorganisms, that can cause a lot of problem, illness particularly. And this waterborne disease is also somewhere related with the meteorological parameters. For instance, it has been reported that the gastrointestinal infections have been somewhere associated with the increase in temperature, even the rainfall, heavy rainfall, flooding conditions. This is somewhere associated. When I say these kind of infections is going to increase because of the increase in temperature, that has to be point must be noted very carefully. Because these waterborne diseases, the incidence may be more prominent in certain areas, in certain communities where the basic amenities are lacking. Think about the informal settlements. They don't have the basic livable environment indeed. When I say livable environment means the sanitation, clean sanitation is required, the water they drink, it should be pure enough. So in case if it has been troubled, if it is challenged, the circumstances, environmental circumstances are challenged, then the climate change impact will be more prominent. So to address this issue, we need to take care of the environmental conditions, and even particularly the environmental well-being is also very important. In addition to the economic background, and even the the socioeconomic background and the way they address the issue of climate change. So this is indeed an important point as far as the climate change and health is concerned. Next one is, we need to talk about the foodborne diseases. When we talk about foodborne diseases or food spoilage, it is perhaps a very prominent thing that we are observing in the recent past. For the simple reason that the changing climatic condition can have an influence on the pathogens, particularly those pathogens that can have a harmful effect on the food grains or any other consumer products. When I say consumer products, it will be used for consumption purpose. And these organisms can affect the food products, starting from the food production till it reaches the customer. Particularly all along the food chain, these organisms can have an important role to play. These organisms by itself are influenced by the climatic condition. When I say climatic condition, particularly the humid condition, high rainfall or flooded condition, high temperature. These risk factors, or in other words, these increase in temperature or high humidity, they are more favorable for the pathogenic organisms, for their growth, dissemination, and action. So these organisms will be furthering the problem of food spoilage. Second important point as far as the foodborne diseases are concerned, these factors, particularly the foodborne diseases, are not only related with climate-related factors, it is also influenced by the changing population dynamics, the urbanization, the diet trends as well, and also the new things that were like your antimicrobial resistance also. The emergence of antimicrobial resistance, these all will be complicating the issue of foodborne diseases. So it is a very important aspect that we are observing at the intersection of climate change and human health. Going further, if it has been reported that a strong association has been observed between the ambient temperature and many organisms, particularly Salmonella. Salmonella typhi, every one of us know Salmonella typhi. There are other species of Salmonella. They are causing a lot of problem to human health. The typhoid fever is a prominent one, and also salmonellosis is also there. This organism, their impact, their vitality, or even the incidence of it is influenced by the climatic condition. And when you talk about other group of diseases, particularly the RTA means the respiratory tract infections. Respiratory tract infection particularly has been influenced by many organisms, the bacteria, the fungus and viruses can cause a lot of problem to the respiratory tract. And that is, even at times, it may lead to tuberculosis or pneumonia. It has been reported that pneumonia incidence is somewhere associated with the increasing climatic factors, particularly the temperature, and even the extreme weather events, the flooding condition as well. So in temperate region, it has been reported that this occurrence of pneumonia is higher during the winter months. So here again, this pneumonia, tuberculosis, and multi-drug resistant, many diseases are coming up. These diseases also can be influenced by climate change. So we can understand the gravity of the situation, how climate change can affect the society through human health disasters. So we have discussed about certain diseases which are communicable. There are other group of diseases, non-communicable diseases. Incidentally, these non-communicable diseases are much more prominent in the developed countries, high-income countries. In fact, it has been said that 80% of the burden in the high-income group countries has been associated with your non-communicable diseases. This impact is much lesser in the poor countries or developing countries. Nevertheless, it may increase in the coming decades. There are certain non-communicable diseases, they are climate sensitive. For instance, the cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases which are not infectious, and also certain diseases related with your endocrine glands. Particularly the most prominent one is diabetes. In fact, these kind of diseases make the human being more, vulnerable to climate change impacts. And this is somewhere related with your non-climatic factors as well. So these diseases, particularly the climate-sensitive, non-communicable diseases, also should be addressed. How to address? Our adaptation measures should be integrated in nature, and it should have a very policy-oriented or region-specific actions. And since we have talked about the major, highlighting point between the climate change and society, particularly the human health, we need to talk about other impacts as well. So how those impacts can have an impact on human beings, or for that matter, human society. The first and foremost important thing is the climate change can have an impact on all the possible natural resources, whether it is a water resources, forest, biodiversity. Every resources is going to be impacted by climate change. We know these natural resources are giving us a lot of services, and it has a very important function to play, ecosystem services. These ecosystem services will be impacted by climate change. For instance, if we are losing the biodiversity, think about the organisms that is providing us a lot of benefits, a lot of services. If that particular organism will be extinct, what will happen? What will happen to the society? For instance, 45% of croplands are cross-pollinated. When I say those crops are cross-pollinated, definitely it requires the agent, whether it is an insect or some other organisms, for cross-pollination. If the butterflies, even the pollinating insects, are impacted by climate change, what will happen to the cross-pollination, or what will happen to the yield of the agriculture crops? Particularly when I talk about cross-pollinated crops, incidentally these cross-pollinated crops comes more often in the horticulture crops. We know that how important the nutritional security is. We need a lot of protein. We need a lot of other nutrients for our well-being. If these horticulture crops, because of the impact of climate change on the pollinating insects, are going to be impacted, then what will happen to the issue of food security? So it's a very grave concern. See how it is related. And also, if you see, it has been reported that we are in the 6th era of mass extinction. Already 5 things have happened in the past, but in the present era is of 6th mass extinction. When I say 6th mass extinction, think about the way how organisms we are losing it. They are becoming extinct because of climate change. And what more impact that we can expect from climate change, and that too at the intersection of climate change and society. Society will be at loss if you are losing the organisms. Next impact is impact on food systems, particularly the agriculture crop production. When I say food system, not only the agriculture crop production, even all the components of food systems, even agroforestry, the tree crops, even the horticulture crops I meant, even the livestock, so everything will be impacted because of climate change. Why? Because all aspects of related with food system are climate sensitive. This climate sensitive enterprise, particularly the agriculture, they'll be impacted more because of climate change, and that can have an effect on the society. Think about the kind of incidence of malnutrition. People are more vulnerable to malnutrition, particularly in the developing countries that we are experiencing. And in case if this proceeds, whether the impact is in the negative. When I say negative, if there is a decrease in the agriculture production, that can have further the problems of malnutrition, undernutrition, and at sometimes, the issue of obesity has also been observed in the developed countries. So the society is impacted through the uncertainties in food production. Next is, I just talked about the coastal areas, coastal region, wherein the coastal impacts are increasing. When I say coastal impacts, particularly related with the extreme weather events, I was talking about the tropical cyclone, even increase in sea level also. Sometimes it can transgress the land area and it may cause coastal flooding. And this all can have an impact on not only agricultural land in the coastal areas, but it can have an impact on the people dwelling in the coastal areas. There's a possibility of submergence, and this submergence may compel the people to migrate to other areas. So a related consequence of climate change impact on society is the migration. Without the willingness, the people may be tempted to migrate to some other pastures, greener pastures, where they can achieve certain livelihood, they can have certain economic opportunities. So the climate change is also related with the displacement of human beings. And talking further on the coastal impacts, if you see in the coastal locations, the kind of infrastructure we have with coastal infrastructure, they may be also impacted by climate change. So what we need to do is that we need to have certain disaster preparedness in coastal areas. Our infrastructure built in the coastal areas, not only in coastal areas, other areas also should be proof enough to climate change impacts. And when you talk about the society as well, totally, economic well-being is important. They need money for their livelihood to meet their daily expenses, daily needs. And their livelihood, certain times, when I say certain times, certain people may be dependent on the nature for their livelihood. Those people will be primarily affected by climate change impacts. I talked about the people, the agriculture intensive countries or indigenous communities, or the people living in the island dwellers. They may be impacted first by the climate change, whether it's coastal flooding or submergence, or in other words, the impacts on their economic activity. So this impact can affect their livelihood. If it is affecting their livelihood, think about a country which is totally dependent on agriculture. There are many countries still in the world, they are totally dependent on the basic, the agricultural activity. If that agricultural activity, if it is affected, what will happen to the economy of the country? So the economy of the country also will be endangered by the impacts of climate change. And what kind of support, or in other words, what we need to do it? So we need to take the steps possible so that we will be reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from all the activities, particularly the energy sector, transportation sector, or agriculture sector. That's number one. Second important aspect is that we will make the energy systems net zero. Means particularly if you see the energy systems are causing a lot of problem to the environment, particularly climate change. So that we need to take the steps. The third important aspect is the transportation sector, because it is also contributing handsome amount to greenhouse gas. When I say handsome amount, 14% is no more or less. 14% of greenhouse gas emission from transportation sector is a big amount. So we need to have a kind of a behavioral change is required in the transportation sector. The use of renewable energy, use of even electric vehicles or green hydrogen, the kind of the support, financial support that is required, that should be provided. So in a way that we will be changing the landscape of transportation from fossil fuels to renewable energy based system. So that is indeed requirement of the day. Third aspect, as far as the addressing the issue is concerned, we need to look for certain strategies, particularly agriculture sector, agriculture, forestry related sectors. We need to make the system more climate resilient and make the activity more climate smart. When I say climate smart, it is a duty of an agriculture system to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to increase the production, and also to achieve the food security and nutritional security. This is a very important aspect that we need to take into account. And also, if you see the kind of steps that has been taken internationally, because when a society, the human society is affected by climate change, United Nations body and many other organizations, they have taken a lot of steps to capacity building or bring in climate literacy. In fact, this session is also a part of the climate literacy session. When you go for climate literacy or capacity building, you are making the individuals, the community, more informed to make a rational decision. And that decision will have a less impact on the environment And also, we will be in a position to address the issue of climate change, particularly the impacts. And also, if you see, as far as the international bodies are concerned, United Nations particularly, through many amendments to their laws, particularly even the recent one, the Paris Agreement, and also the Sustainable Development Goals that we have kept for ourselves, for the humanity. By the year 2030, we will be achieving a lot of goals regarding the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The 17 goals talks directly or indirectly about climate change. Particularly the SDG 13 talks about climate action. The point here is that international community is also taking a lot of steps to address the issue of climate change. The recent development is the Paris Agreement, which is very obligatory on national governments to take every step possible to keep the increase in surface air temperature well below 2 degrees centigrade, and also we'll be taking steps to keep the increase in surface air temperature well below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Nevertheless, it is a challenging task, but the governments across the world, they are taking the steps. And also we have kept for ourselves, international community, to achieve climate neutrality or carbon neutrality by the year 2050. And India is also taking a lot of steps. And their steps are very prominent. Way back in 2008 itself, we have started to have a policy on climate change. That policy is National Action Plan on Climate Change, which includes 8 missions. We are going to talk about agriculture, greening the forest, or afforestation, reforestation, even how we will be addressing the issue of water scarcity, energy security. Everything has been incorporated in the National Action Plan on Climate Change. And also, we have been taking all the steps possible to implement the Paris Agreement in action. So, in today's session, we have talked about a very important topic, climate change and society. We discussed the concerns in front of us and how climate change is going to impact the society through the agriculture production system, transportation system, energy system. We also talked about how climate change is going to impact the human health. Lastly, we have discussed the initiatives taken by the United Nations body, particularly the Climate Literacy Mission. And also our government, national government, is also taking all the steps possible to address the issue of climate change so that we can achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2070. Thank you very much.